just indicating that we'll all take our seats and we'll get going, because we know it's an incredibly busy few days and many of us are programmed minute by minute. So a formal welcome, everyone, from my partner in crime, Phumzile, and I, as the co-chairs of the Broadband Commission Working Group on Gender. It's our last meeting, and we're launching this amazing report on cyber violence against women and girls, a global wake-up call. But before we get to all that, welcome Baroness Bevan Kidron, our keynote speaker today. We will welcome Irina Bukova, Director General of UNESCO, when she comes from her last engagement. In the meantime, Gender Equality Head of UNESCO is here, and also our friend Doreen, who has been with us from the start under previous head of ITU and now current head of ITU, who always supported the work. Thank you, Doreen, so much. And we also have, is it Needy to thank for the coordination of the final report on the cyber violence. Also welcome present with us Anita Sarkeesian, Kathy Brown and Robert Coco. So just a few opening comments from me. What's convening everyone at this incredible UN space over the next few days is, of course, the gavelling of the SDGs tomorrow. Let's give it a clap. Because truly this has been a process. You know, there's been 3 solid years of work go into what will be gavelled tomorrow, with all the national consultations and the thematic consultations and the open working group and so many actors acting and member states negotiating. But you know, we're there. We've got this new Agenda 2030, which is very ambitious. And I think everyone in this room would have been united around the goal not only of seeing gender equality and women's empowerment mainstreamed into every aspect of sustainable development, but having the standalone goal as well. That's been so important to get this SDG 5. And relevant to our discussion today, it does have the target around eliminating all forms of violence against women and girls. Cyber violence is one of those forms, and I think our report shows us, you know, we've got some mountains to climb to deal with this target comprehensively by 2030. Now, a tremendous amount has changed in the ICT field, as we all know, since the turn of the millennium and the MDGs being launched. In fact, so much has happened. One of the indicators was to measure the rollout of landline communication to everyone. Well, that's not really so relevant anymore, is it? Because you short-circuit it with mobile technology. But at the start of the MDGs, only 6.5% of the world's population had access to the internet. Well, today 43% is online. Only 10% had a mobile phone back at the start of this century. The mobile phone penetration now is just phenomenal, and on we go. So the objective of this working group has always been to say, well, that's well and good, but what's it doing for women and girls? And do they have genuine access? And is the content relevant? And then how do we deal with, of course, the issues that emerge with new technologies like the cyber violence and the bulleting and the bullying? And we had the working group report back in 2013 on doubling opportunities, which was around precisely the benefits of digital inclusion for women and girls, closing the digital gender gap, which of course is not just a digital divide, it's a knowledge divide, it's an opportunities divide, it's a services divide in the modern world. If you're not digitally engaged, it's very hard to be fully engaged in the life of your society, economy and polity. So in the SDGs, and we've talked about this a lot at the Broadband Commission, how to get targets specific to the ICTs into them. There are 4 that are very specific, but let's acknowledge that ICTs are going to enable achievement across the SDGs. They're enabling technologies. That's the power of them. But there is one which calls specifically for using ICTs to promote gender equality and empowerment of women and girls. So we've done a lot of work on that. But I think the focus of today is really also these risks that come with ICTs and the internet to women and girls' well-being and advancement. And the experts are telling us that, and I quote, the scope, the volume, the content of material on the internet which promotes or enacts trafficking in human beings for the purpose of sexual exploitation is frankly unprecedented. So there's a huge gender dimension to this challenge. 70% of people who are trafficked around the world are women and girls, and 97% of women trafficked are said to be sexually exploited. This is horrible. The internet is also noted by our experts to have, quote, become the primary means for international child pornography rings to disseminate their horrible material worldwide. And cyber stalking is now recognised as an extension of traditional stalking. And some research suggests that between 8 and 12% of women will experience such stalking at some point in their lives, but actually we could expect that to rise with the rapid spread and reach of electronic communication. The 2014 Global Status Report on Violence Prevention, recently launched by WHO, UN Office on Drugs and Crime and UNDP, documents a range of indirect effects of violence on women, from inability to work, to loss of wages, to lack of participation in social and political activities, and economic activities obviously, and limited ability to care for themselves and their children. Unfortunately, a large number of female internet users live in countries where the harassment and abuse they experience online is very unlikely to be punished. So, we've got some real challenges. So what do we do? Our working group's final report says we must invest in prevention of this problem by sensitising publics, implementing technical safeguards, deterring potential offenders through legal and regulatory sanctions. And all such measures will be necessary to address the online-offline continuum of violence against women, from addressing the root causes of attitudes which foster that violence to improving the governance of cyberspace and ensuring full investigation and prosecution of the online as well as the offline perpetrators. Now, in addressing these issues, it is so important that women themselves are part of designing the solutions, a big part, and not just passive beneficiaries of others' efforts. And the final report of our working group on gender, this report calls for more women to be engaged in the technology field, as we always do. With respect to decision-making, women are all too rarely decision makers in areas like technology and the governance of the cyberspace. So again, we've got work to do. I think Goal 5 on gender equality in the SDG agenda, which has this target, needs to be seen alongside especially Goal 16 on building peaceful and inclusive societies, which calls for a reduction in levels of violence and stresses the need for inclusive governance and access to justice for all, including against crimes like these. So, earlier this year, a call was made not only to renew the commitments of the Beijing Platform for Action of '95, but to review and strengthen them to account for the ICT-related opportunities and risks to women and girls. Our final report calls attention to the risks, but it also calls attention to new and innovative solutions on the strategic use of ICTs, including through mobile apps, to monitor and report gender-based violence. Over the past 3 years, I'm really so pleased at how this working group has raised awareness of the importance of digital inclusion of women and girls, and I think we've done a lot to push forward the recommendations from the first report, and we've all been advocates for ICT and broadband related targets being in the SDGs, and gender equality became a goal for the Broadband Commission itself, which was important. All members of the working group have made and keep on making such important contributions to this work. As we close the working group to move to onto the next chapters, we have the bold declaration of the final report that the victimisation of women and girls online is unacceptable. Preventing and addressing gender-based violence in all its forms, including online perpetration, is fundamental for building the world we want to see for women and girls of the future. So exciting times, and really very, very big thanks to everyone who's been part of it. So my partner in crime and collaborator and co-chair, Pumzile, you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Helen, for those wonderful remarks, and good morning to everybody who is here. And thank you so much for the support that the Commission is getting for this work. Thank you so much to all the people who put together the report and those who contributed to it. And it's always a pleasure to be in this company of these many thought leaders on the subject that concerns the Broadband Commission, both in relation to women, but broadly also all the issues that you are so knowledgeable about. To UNDP, ITU, UNESCO, thank you so much for the leadership that you provide. We are here today and we'll hear more on the cyber violence, something that has troubled many of us. I was just saying to Doreen, I'm so glad that this report has come so quickly, because I think last year we were still just thinking about how do we need to respond to this so that we nip it in the bud. So, I mean, the UN at 70 has quick turnaround times. I think that's something we must tick. The continuum of violence against women that women experience offline seems to be just as wild and as troubling online as it is troubling offline. And if anything else, this report must make that statement so that we do not see this as a minor, small problem. It is a big problem that must concern us just as much as we are concerned with violence that women experience offline, which we regard as a public health crisis, as a pandemic, and all the names that we give to it. The same names we must be used when we're talking about what is happening online. Thankfully, in the SDGs, particularly in Goal 5, we make reference to the need to address violence against women, but also within Goal 5, also, we have an indicator on the utilization of technology to address gender equality and women's empowerment. So I'm hoping we can harvest these two and make sure that we make them work together much strongly. And as we embark in the new SDGs, we have set ourselves an ambitious target. Though when I speak to young people, they don't think this is ambitious. When we say that we want substantive gender equality by 2030, they said, 2030? Why not next year? You know, if you've been walking this road for a long time, you have a different perspective, but it's good to have that impatience with young people. So if we are truly wanting to achieve a substantive, irreversible gender equality by 2030, it is important that all of the drivers of gender inequality are addressed. And this, I would see, as one of the new drivers of potential harmful gender inequality. It was quite clear, however, that we will not realize this goal if we do not work in a coordinated manner. And the fact that in this commission we bring together people who represent the many critical stakeholders in this area also makes that important. In our 21st century, this means ensuring that technology promotes gender equality and women's empowerment, and that any threats that it poses are squarely met. And at the same time, we need to constantly make the point about the advantages of technology for women, and that the advantages still outweigh the disadvantages, but that we should not be light about the disadvantages and the challenges that technology bring with them. We know that as we attract women to STEM as we race to close the digital divide, we need to make sure that we are equipping women at the same time on how they could protect themselves from the unintended consequences. Violence against women and girls threatens women all over the globe and undermines their well-being, their rights, their progress in all aspects of life. We are now seeing this spread online then, including harassment, stalking, harmful images and stereotype, facilitation of sex trafficking, and too many others to mention. I was in the Philippines recently, and the stories that I heard there are just even too difficult to repeat, and what is happening to children. So clearly, if a child becomes compromised at that early age because of how technology is being used by ill-intending adults, that's something that calls on all of us to really jump into and spring into action. There's a risk of this, the risk of this are significant, like the offline violence, as I have said, and there are great implications for women's physical well-being, the depression that women go through, some of the impacts that it has in terms of the mental challenges and the stress that women live with, the fact that it can impact on their livelihood as women disengage from using the internet, as well as cost to society. We are also seeing the risk that women will be further behind benefiting from the global digital revolution, not unless we entrench the safeguards. At 2015 the 2015 GSMA report highlighted that gender access and usage gap was partly as a result of fear from online threats and concerns over privacy and security. When women are left behind the online world, this can potentially deny them avenues of political participation, influence, economic benefits, and some of the social benefits that come with the use of technology. We had an interesting, disturbing experience ourselves at UN Women when we launched He for She, that Emma was stalked online. Emma Watson, our ambassador, was stalked online. And when I looked at the videos that were made to stalk her, they were so well done. So, and just I saw that this young man took the time to actually produce what was such a sleek presentation, all in order to stalk and intimidate women and anyone else who believed in the message. I realized, and they also introduced themselves as students. So yeah, it was quite disturbing. But at the same time, we saw a greater pushback on those who were against the stalking, and I think in the end, the triumph has been for those who were representing the good message. Thankfully, we're also seeing greater attention to these issues by governments, and I think this report will also be helpful to many of the governments who are paying attention to these issues. In my travels, I hear many stories about what young women especially have faced, and the ugly threats that they live with. These are issues that are not just confined to the developed world. These we also see in developing countries, and that is why it is very encouraging that the work that we do and the partnerships that we have with Anita's Feminist Frequency and the APC, Take Back the Tech campaign, are shining examples of how we're trying to reach beyond, to reach to women all over the world. It's always going to be important for us to highlight the pros in using technology to the established institutions, to parents, as well as to those that influence young people. Advantages like being able to learn on the go, the cost effectiveness of using technology to access information that you otherwise have to get into transport to move to point A to point B to collect. The fact that in real time you are able to access technology that is qualitative, that is available to everybody all over the world, even if you are in the back and beyond part of the world that otherwise struggles to be part of the center of things. The fact that you also, with the use of technology, are able to work from home and work effectively and reach markets that are far away from where you are. And of course, the fact that you are also able to have a voice and be a voice that goes way beyond where you live. So constantly repeating the messages is important, alongside understanding the fact that the anonymity that allows the stalkers and those that use technology for negative reasons, the anonymity gives them the strength to do the most horrible thing, because they don't have to be in front of you and to confront the person that they are abusing. The fact that it is quite cheap to be able, just by the press of a button, you can depress a person. The whole concept of the information going viral and the instant fame that seems to please people who are cruel for some reason, in the same order as people who don't mind just going around shooting a lot of people. This whole thing of, you know, just hurting many people at a go is something that is quite troubling, that technology enables. And the fact that we can't protect children in areas where age appropriateness is important. Anyone can disguise their age group and provide a picture that is different from who they are, and through that a message from a completely different person can reach children that we otherwise would want to protect. So we have constantly to work with these things, and we need to communicate both the pros and the cons at the same time, all the time, so that we strengthen the move forward. We also strengthen the capacity for us to fight back. Women must continue to be at the center of both the messaging, the prevention, the creativity, as well as the leadership of the sector. We are grateful to the partners that we are working with, the Alliance for the Affordable Internet and APC. We are grateful to Technovation and Cisco that we are working with to promote young women in the technology sector, Microsoft and Afros to understand and develop technology solutions around violence against women, Mozilla, with whom we are working to build young women's web literacy and digital citizenship. And of course, we are also thankful for the dedication of the work that everybody who's in this team does. And we hope we can rely and call upon you today and always to be in the forefront and to carry the message of this report, to sensitize, to promote the safeguards, and for all of us to make sure that we have the sanctions and that the policymakers take the responsibility of implementing the provisions of this report very seriously. We thank you very much, and we look forward to the deliberations of today.
Thank you very much, Phumzile, and we know UN Women's voice will be so loud and clear on these issues, and we really look to your leadership on it. Now, while waiting for Irina, I'll go next to, well, the next two speakers are our reps of our two agencies who really led the whole Broadband Commission effort for the UN system. And first I'm going to come to Doreen, ITU Chief of Strategic Planning. Doreen, you've been with it all from the beginning. You've been so supportive of the work of the Gender Working Group. So over to you to make some comments on behalf of ITU.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Helen. And good morning, everyone. It's great to see so many people here for this important launch this morning. I know that we are competing with a number of other events, so we're really delighted to see such a great turnout this morning. I'd like to start on behalf of our Secretary General, Hulin Zhao, to first commend the two co-chairs of this working group, Helen and Pumzili, as well as all of the members of this expert working group, for their very bold decision to tackle this challenging issue that's increasingly plaguing the online environment. I'd also like to thank UNESCO, our UNESCO colleagues that are here, the Deputy Director General, for their commitment to women's issues, to online women's issues, and of course to supporting the launch today. Tomorrow, as Helen and Pumzili have mentioned, world leaders will gather here in the UN to adopt the agenda for the next 15 years, the SDG agenda, the 17 goals and 169 targets. I would like to, Helen and Pumzili have mentioned many of those goals and targets, but I wanted to also mention something in the preamble in paragraph 15. And in the preamble of the transformative agenda, it recognizes the spread of ICTs and global interconnectedness as having great potential to accelerate human progress. And if you take that together with SDG 5, that clearly recognizes the importance of ICTs in empowering women and girls, and then on top of that, going back to Helen's statistics about the explosive growth in the sector, at the end of this year, it's predicted we'll have 3.2 billion people online. 3.2 billion people online equals 3.2 billion opportunities, opportunities for people to create, to share, to discuss, and to learn. But as our report shows us today, all of this is going to be put into jeopardy. We will not be able to achieve the human progress, human potential that is spelled out in the SDG preamble if we don't take action. And that action is very nicely spelled out by Nidhi in the report today. And this report is launching a wake-up call, but this wake-up call is perhaps long overdue. The report has wide ramifications both for the safety and security of women and girls online, but also for the health of the online environment, and by extension, the future growth of online services. We read about it every day in the papers, on the news, on the internet, stories about women and girls being victims of violence. For some of us, that issue comes closer to home, maybe some of our colleagues, family members. As Nidhi will explain in the report, there's something like 75%, close to 75%, I believe, of women that have experienced some form of violence online. And she also clearly explains that women are much more likely than men to get sexually explicit and threatening messages online. And so this really underscores the importance of trust and security and building confidence online. And this is something that world leaders stressed back in 2005 and before that in 2003 when they gathered for the World Summit on the Information Society, and they adopted an action line, which is known as C6 or C7, to basically work on building a framework of trust, and we're not there yet. The WSIS process will go through its 10-year review here in New York in December, and trust has clearly been reflected as an issue that really needs to be addressed so that women and girls and everyone, frankly, boys and girls, can be safe and secure on the internet. Today, it is time for action, and as Nidhi, I would say, highlights very well, a call for a three-pronged approach of sensitizing, introducing safeguards, and also sanctions. At the ITU back in 2008, we launched an initiative which was called the Child Online Protection Initiative, and we brought together a range of players, very different players than we were used to working with. We had a number of NGOs. We started working with Interpol, the Internet Watch Foundation. We brought in Disney for the first time. We had a number of private and public parties that were interested, as well as a number of UN agencies. And what we started to do was put together a series of guidelines, guidelines for parents, guidelines for educators, guidelines for policymakers as well as industry, to try to really put forward principles and actions that everyone could take to try to make the Internet a safer place for our children. This morning we're going to hear from Baroness Kindren, and as she will explain, perhaps it's time to move the conversation from protection to rights, and we'll be hearing about her Our Rights initiative. I remember, Baroness, the first time that we spoke on the phone, you said, it was time to be bold. Then you went on and said, it's time to be audacious. And I didn't forget that. I wrote that down. Everyone really needs to play their part, and all stakeholders have to come together. I think parents have a huge role, and it's a difficult role. I am a mother, and I have 4 teenagers. And that's a big challenge. But 4 teenagers means I have 4 laptops in my house. I have 4 extra smartphones, and we also have a bunch of other tablets. When the children first got their laptops, my husband and I were quite strict and said that the laptops could only be used in the family sort of open spaces. And we put on the protection, all the different software, and that seemed to work fine in the beginning. But then all of a sudden they were taking the public bus, they needed to have their smartphones, and then they got tablets from grandparents, and there were devices everywhere. And it was hard to keep those same rules. We do have one rule at night: no one's allowed to have a device in their room. So we gather up all the devices before they go to bed, and we have one place where we stash the devices. Sometimes the kids find them in the middle of the night. But what we do with the children, and I think it's an important thing to do, is we talk about Internet stuff over dinner. And I follow a lot of my children's friends, like on Instagram. And so in dinner conversations, we'll hold up some maybe pictures, inappropriate pictures, things that their friends might be posting, and then we'll discuss whether the kids think that that's appropriate or not. And it's very helpful, I think, for parents to keep the dialogue going. The other important thing that we discuss with the kids is that when they're parts of different groups, like they have different groups on WhatsApp or on the different apps that they use, that if the groups that they're in are saying things about other children or people, that they can be guilty by association. They had an incident at their school last year where someone was bullied, and all of the kids that were on that group were all suspended. And I think that was an important message. So I try to tell my kids, if someone is saying something nasty about somebody else, get off that group. That they need to be really careful about who they're hanging out with on the Internet. But it's very scary, and as a parent, it just makes our job so much more difficult. Tim Berners-Lee once said that the future of the web depends on ordinary people taking responsibility for this extraordinary resource and challenging those who seek to manipulate the web against the public good. We are the ordinary people, and we have an imperative to act, and we must act now. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much, Doreen. And I don't have 4 teenagers, but I can just visually see what this picture you described for us. I think probably in a lot of families, people are at the point of talking to each other through the tweet message at the table. So we're communicating in interesting ways. Thank you so much. Now, we're going to wait for Irina. You will read Irina's statement. Okay, thank you very much, Head of Gender Equality from UNESCO. Thank you.
Good morning. My apologies on behalf of the Director General, Ms. Irina Bokova. She is at another event on the other side of the town, and I just got the message that although they are on their way, they may not be able to make it. So she asked for your forgiveness and asked me to read her statement. I have done this before. I impersonate Ms. Bokova at different events when she can't make it and we can't clone her yet. But I will try to do justice to the statement. My name is Gülser Korat. I am the Director for Gender Equality at UNESCO. So Baroness Kidron, ladies and gentlemen, excellencies, I wish to thank Fumzile, Executive Director of UN Women, and Helen, Administrator of the United Nations Development Programme, for their leading contribution to the Gender Working Group of the Broadband Commission for Sustainable Digital Development. Let me say a word about the Commission. The Broadband Commission is co-chaired by His Excellency Mr. Paul Kagame and Mr. Carlos Slim Helu, with the support of the Secretary General of the International Telecommunication Union and myself, that is Ms. Bokova. Launched in response to the call by Secretary General Ban Ki-moon to step up efforts to meet the Millennium Development Goals, the Commission brings together leaders in government, the United Nations system, the private sector, guided by the same conviction. The conviction we must harness every accelerator to eradicate poverty, strengthen inclusion, advance sustainable development. This goes beyond mere advocacy for broadband networks and services. This is about opening new paths to create and share knowledge, to enhance freedom of expression, to widen learning opportunities. This vision guides the work of the Commission, including this new report on cyber violence against women and girls, a worldwide wake-up call. Thomas Friedman, author of The World is Flat, wrote, "What can be done will be done." Then he asked the key question, will it be done by you or to you? These are the stakes of cyber violence. Technology alone is not enough to empower. It is what people do with technology that empowers or not. This is why human rights and dignity must be the principles guiding all action. This is why we must empower women and men to ensure change is done by them together, but especially women. We know there is a digital divide in access to the internet. With this report, we know more about the violence girls and women face once they are online, through trolling, hate speech, hacking, harassment, spamming, malicious sharing. This violence is pernicious because it plays on core features of the internet: the ubiquity of the devices, the mobility and quasi-permanence of online data, the anonymity of abusers. This creates a climate where abuse goes unreported, violence is not halted. This is part of the wider violence facing girls and women in the real world, one of the most pervasive violations of human rights today, occurring in all countries across all socioeconomic groups. This is an affront to individual dignity, a violation of human rights, and a barrier to development. Cyber violence against girls and women is complex. Our action must be equally multidimensional. The bottom line is cyber violence is cybercrime and must be tackled as such. The report gives strong examples of action across the world, led by governments, civil society, the private sector. We need precisely this wide angle of action because this is about changing attitudes. This is fundamentally about culture change. 2 years ago, the Secretary General's Unite to End Violence Against Women campaign was launched to highlight the need to end violence against women and girls, including online, and the empowerment potential of new technologies. All efforts must start with ensuring quality education for girls and boys, with a focus on media and information literacy, especially for girls and women, to make the Internet a power for human rights and peace. This is the spirit of UNESCO's new publication, Mobile Phones and Literacy, Empowerment in Women's Hands, and all our work to empower girls and men through mobile learning. I brought some copies of this publication, which just came out a week ago. There are copies there, so if you like to take one, please help yourself. We need new efforts to strengthen national laws and regulations to craft stronger safeguards and terms of reference with industry. Overall, we must raise the profile of women in the tech sector to nurture new role models. Most of all, we need to stand up against violence to support girls and women facing abuse. UNESCO is working across the board through support to research on violence against girls and women, through our Global Alliance on Media and Gender in Media, through work to advance media and information literacy for girls and women, through action to ensure access to quality education for girls across the world. Just this year, we launched a program with UN Women, UNFPA, and the World Bank for girls and women's education through ICTs, including through ICTs. In all this, we must never lose sight of the big picture. Stopping violence is about human rights, it's about justice. It's about transforming societies for sustainable development and for lasting peace. Thank you very much.
And thank you for that very strong message from Director General of the Arena. Well, we come now to our keynote speaker, who is a baroness. Baronesses sit in the House of Lords at Westminster. And
unelected.
They sit. They used to be kind of inherited, I think we can say, but these days it's modern procedures. And I'm very happy to say that when I visited the Houses of Parliament at Westminster in July, I found that your colleague Jack McConnell and also a Conservative parliamentarian had formed an SDGs caucus, so across parties. So that was great. But our colleague Biban Kidron is very familiar in the community of advocates for gender equality and women's empowerment. She is an award-winning filmmaker and founder of the I Rights campaign. So inspire us with your words, Biban. Welcome to you.
Thank you. I wish I had remembered I said to be bold and audacious when I wrote my words, so forgive me if you're going to be disappointed. Thank you to the Broadband Commission Working Group, and in particular to Doreen and the ITU for inviting me. I really am honoured to be amongst you, and I'm going to talk specifically about children and young people in this arena, and I am going to hopefully make the case for us to move from protection to rights, overall rights, as our way forward. Several years ago, I made a film about teenagers and the internet. I was curious to see how growing up with access to the world in your back pocket would change the experience of childhood. And it was chilling. Not chilling because it brought me face to face with 8-year-olds watching extreme pornography in the playground, horrific and sensational stories of bullying which ended in suicide, violent sexual transactions in exchange for smartphones, or the ubiquitous compulsion to being online in places and at times that caused anxiety and mental health problems. As upsetting as these scenarios were, they were familiar, horribly familiar. And today's report speaks compellingly of the issues of cyber violence that come in their wake. What brought me up short was the insidious manner in which the technology was being deployed. the experience was chilling, because in spite of our having spent decades articulating the rights and needs of children, we had, by putting smartphones in their pockets and computers in their bedrooms, not only exposed them to an unmediated adult world, but allowed that adult world unmediated access to them. With the advent of the online childhood, real-world protections were suddenly circumvented. The provisions of the UNCRC, national legislation, and our cultural promises made to children had been superseded by a new world order where children cohabit with adults in a vast, unregulated space. Now, a utopian may rejoice that the world of the internet treats all of us the same. But for those concerned with the rights of children, it is a problem. Yeah? Digital technology is not a communication tool, it is not a toy, but the organizing technology of our world. A technology with declared value systems about everything from sharing information to free markets, but absolutely no adherence to the rights or special status of children. Indeed, the culture of the digital world runs roughshod over their rights. The vast majority of platforms and sites are designed to gather data for commercial gain, fundamentally contravening the rights of young people to be protected from economic exploitation and their rights to privacy. Terms and conditions encourage children in their tens of millions daily to enter into agreements for which they have no legal capacity to fulfill. Information about their health, their sexuality, their location, their likes, their dislikes, build an aggregated, uncontextualized digital profile held in perpetuity to be used for purposes that have not yet been invented. Denying rights to self-determination, free association, access to diverse media, etc., and so on. Meanwhile, compulsive sharing of personal information fueled by algorithms that act like steroids on keywords and phrases create the perfect conditions for acts of public bullying, shaming, threats of violence, sexual violence, in a world where slamming the front door behind you offers you no protection or relief. What happened to Article 19? Sets out the requirement. All appropriate legislative, administrative, social and educational measures to protect the child from all forms of physical or mental violence. Where is that online? My list is illustrative, not exhaustive. I could go on, but the point is clear. Children are growing up in a digital world not defined by kith, kin and culture, but defined by the needs of powerful global corporations and where social relationships have little context and no boundaries. Crucially, a world in which a child is not treated as a child. It is imperative for the young to have access to the digital world, but it is simply unacceptable that their rights and our collective values are not reflected in the structure of the digital technology they are using. And this is not a trivial matter. We are fragmented and divided. Those who work for universal access don't routinely worry about data. The maker movement, passionate about digital creation, don't always think about safety. And the safety campaigners often fail to consider the inbuilt dangers of a technology designed to be compulsive. And all of us, in failing to take a holistic and unified approach, leave a generation of overwhelmed and under-supported children online. So that's why I write.
Yeah.
Our view is that children's rights must be hardwired into the structures of the digital world, a single universal framework of 5 rights that would, if implemented as standard, transform the digital interactions of young people. And I can only do this in brief, so let me assure you that they are written up and they are complex and fully rounded on our website, iRights.uk. The right to remove, Every child and the young person should have the right to easily edit and delete all content that they themselves have created. This is not only about eliminating transgressions, it's about a child's right to privacy, to change as they mature, and the right to own their own self-determined history. The right to know. We believe that children have a right to know who is holding or profiting from their information, what that information is being used for, and meaningful control over if it is copied, traded, or sold. The right to safety and support. We do support the call in today's report for investment in cyber-trained police. But for young people, the greatest number of disturbing and upsetting interactions are not illegal. And many of the support mechanisms are slow, hidden, underfunded, out of sight and out of reach of most children and young people. The right to informed and conscious use. The vast majority of online services are designed to extend use in order to collect data, which means they operate like slot machines, giving small random rewards that keep people online even when they don't wish to be. Deliberately orchestrating a young person's behavior by technological means for profit contravenes multiple rights and all of our moral codes. A young person who cannot leave their device alone is tired, distracted, distanced from their context, and vulnerable when trouble comes. And the right to digital literacy. It is simply not the case that having two fast thumbs means you are in control. Understanding how to use technology is not the same as understanding the technology you are using. iRights defines digital literacy as the skills to create and participate, not simply consume, the knowledge to critique both the content and the structure of digital technologies, and the ability to negotiate and challenge changing social norms, which of course includes challenging cyber violence. And while digital and online technologies are a powerful tool of enfranchisement, it is the case that disadvantage offline is often mirrored and amplified online. Obstacles of gender, race, disability, socioeconomic position remain. The literacy that we advocate takes the specific needs of all these groups into account, including the training of women in tech and incorporating accessibility technology in all cases. The 5 rights are the principle, but by their adoption we change our practice. Our signatories include major players across government, tech, media, law, education, and civil society. And with them, we are developing both technical and cultural mechanisms to deliver the rights in real-world settings, moving the responsibility from children to behave well to those who provide services to behave well. What has been, thank you. What has been exhilarating is seeing the seemingly impossible unfolding as they embed links to children's support as standard, move privacy settings next to the comment box, give their games bedtimes, offer their staff and the children of their staff digital training, make videos of women in tech, and rewrite terms and conditions in language that a 12-year-old could understand. Recently, in Scotland, the First Minister set up a commission to work out how to be the first nation in the world to deliver children's rights on and offline equally. Helen Clark said, "Mountains to climb." And I don't doubt you have gathered in this room understand the problem of what I'm suggesting. But you will also understand the power of principle in order to drive practice, which is why I am asking the UN family to adopt iRights as the principle of all your digital interactions with the young and weave them into everything you do, all of those 169 targets. And finally, I am aware that I have spoken about children who are already online and not of the huge challenge and importance to get access for those who by geography, poverty, disability or culture are disenfranchised. But as we find ourselves urgently having to retrofit rights on behalf of the most advantaged young people in the most advantaged parts of the globe, it is worth noting the temptation for vulnerable communities to trade their rights for access. Universal access is the goal, but we must make certain that children who come online in the near future are fully supported digital citizens from the start. As today's report admits, complex situations require complex solutions. But whilst we need young people to grow into respectful and self-respecting adults to stem the flow of cyber violence to women and girls, so too do we need to deliver on our promises embodied in the UNCRC and our duty of care to the next generation. They need rights, both on and offline, in order to create conditions in which they can grow into 21st century digital citizens creatively, knowledgeably, and fearlessly. Thank you.
Well, Biban, we all want to tweet your wonderful speech. And it's so wonderful that the House of Lords has within it advocacy like yours. It was just amazing. So thank you so much. And I think you've, yeah, big thanks. So before everyone gets to have a go and a say, we're going to have a full presentation on the report from Nidhi, and I hope I'm pronouncing the name right, who has coordinated the development of the final report, and she's going to walk the meeting through the key findings, and then she will moderate the open discussion. So I will actually disengage myself to go and talk to one of our key funders. Can't do anything about money. It's not everything, but it helps. I have to pay the rent. And a few salaries. Anyway, thank you so much, everyone. Magdi Martinez-Solomon, our Assistant Secretary General at UNDP for Program and Policy Support, is going to take my seat, and wish you all a very happy deliberation. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thanks a lot. Thank you.
And the compelling
words that you put around it, Baroness, to push for a violence-free future, and as you say, the duty of
care for the next generation. This report is available, so I'm not going to give you too much because I want to move very quickly to facilitate the discussion that we have arranged over here in this room. And I will just say very quickly that writing this report, we can go to the next slide. Writing this report was a process basically of opening Pandora boxes, one after the other, and shining a light into the very darkest corners and trying to make sense of what we were seeing. And the only thing I can really say to you right now is that if this is a pulse taker of societal values, if this is a temperature reading of what society feels about women and children and about the ability to prey on vulnerable people, then we really, really have a problem, and we need to be very alarmed by this. Any discussion about sustainable development goals peters to nothing if in fact we have a society that thinks in this way. By the by, as you were speaking, I have to say, I come from East Africa originally, and I grew up in Tanzania, a very carefree, fairly safe context to be growing up in. And Zanzibar Island, just off the coast, is quite multicultural in the sense that it's a seafaring place. It's had a very long history of trade. It's primarily Muslim culture. I was there 4 years ago, sitting on a log, looking out to sea, romanticizing about my time there, and there were 2 young boys, young lads, sitting beside me with a little flip phone, bit of an old flip phone. And they were giggling, and I kind of looked, and my heart sank, because they were looking at, I'm sorry to say, a white woman, a naked white woman, straddling a man. And I think these kids must have been 8 or 9, and I work for the empowerment of women through ICTs. It had never really, this was my first time to see this, actually, and I was speechless. I couldn't even say anything to the kids. I was so ashamed and shocked and worried. So your speech really resonated with me. It brought back that imagery. Next slide. So as has already been said, one of the main findings, we took a lot of our data from some primary data like the UK Globe poll, a lot of secondary data, and this was one of the top figures we targeted, which is that 73% of women claim to have been exposed to or have experienced some form of online violence. We collected these reports from individuals, from institutions, from right across the world. Women using ICTs to embarrass their harassers on an Air India flight, for instance. You know, to much more serious situations where, as you say, teenage girls have been courted into suicide. And it's the mob mentality of this. So I won't, press upon this more. We have already looked, we've already had a very vibrant discussion on, but if you want to see some of the stories, if you want to understand how some of this manifests itself, then just look at the report, because we have stories from South Africa, Central Asia, Pakistan, India, Latin America, the Pacific Islands, and that's why it is a worldwide wake-up call. A viral, next slide, wherever my co-partner is. Yes, with the spread of internet, we've seen the spread of violence, and I think the common thing to the stories that we were able to access is when you become targeted like this, it consumes your whole life, emotionally, psychologically, physically, financially, and you either have to fight it or succumb. And this is not an exaggeration. It takes guts to face a cascading mob of abusers and onlookers, of predators and gawkers. Now, I'm already skipping over much of what you were talking about because I don't want to repeat. And we've already get a sense that cybervogue has many different faces, from hate speech to death threats. Next slide. What we do try to do in the report is to situate cybervogue as a systemic issue that needs to be looked at from very many different platforms. There is the I-rights, the human rights side to this, yes. Some of our discussants will talk about the cultural, defined broadly, platform. There is a role, and a very important role, for internet governance. We've been looking at national laws. We've been looking at this in the context of cybercrime and fraud. I want to read you just one little paragraph from the report. It says, "The emerging Internet of Things will connect every machine, business, residence, and vehicle in an intelligent infrastructure of communications, services, and logistics." As you said, Baroness, this is our technologically based infrastructure. Estimates suggest that by 2013, 100 trillion sensors and PFID chips will be embedded in day-to-day gadgets and applications. Cybercrime experts indicate that this may have serious implications for the harassment and tracking potential of cyberborg. When such a high proportion of human and object is connected, what boundaries or firewalls need to be established to protect an individual's right to privacy and safety, and to provide recourse if these boundaries are tampered with? What governance and legal frameworks that enable the right to access as well as the right to withdraw need to be put in place and enforced? And as you said so beautifully, you can't slam the front door and walk away and it doesn't follow you. And this is the thing. So where do we go from here? Next slide. Again, as has already been referred to, we looked at some of the work that's being done by a number of platforms, a number of agencies, a number of organizations that have been going at this for 25 plus years, ever since Internet began to break through. Clearly, we're dealing with age-old problems, but we need new sensitivities and new sensibilities to deal with these age-old problems. So we took from what we were seeing and came up with the 3 pillars. Each pillar has to support the other 2 pillars. And we drew the language of safeguards from some of the current international development work that multilateral development banks are looking at in terms of bringing in environmental and social safeguards into their investment portfolio, and now increasingly human rights safeguards, to put this into the IT context. Next slide. Because of time, I am not actually going to go into the details of each of these sort of outlines, but only to say that we cannot secure the Internet space with safety measures without everyone's awareness. Oh, I think we've jumped one. Perhaps we could go back, please? Yes, thank you. It seems to want to do that. Don't worry, leave it that way. But we cannot secure the Internet space with safety measures without everyone's awareness first of their rights and our collective responsibility. And with regards to safeguards, the document talks about public sector, government, private institutions, industry, and their capacity to track, prevent, alert, record, socialize, not necessarily sanitize. These are all very complex, very interlinked. Under the sanctions side aspect, we do talk about the very different legal frameworks that come together constitutionally, nationally, around privacy laws, around regulation. It is, as you said, a multi-complex systemic issue, which means all the more reason that we need to be working together on this. What needs to change? Really, we have a collective responsibility to get involved, to understand, to work at the household level, and to work with each other. That's clear. And that's what I'm very happy to see different partners in this room, and that we can do this during UNGA Week. Next slide. I will close with this almost, which is that just 2 weeks ago, as the report was going to print, university students returning to the university in Toronto were met with disturbing comments from a user identified as Kill Feminists, targeting the Women and Gender Studies and Sociology departments, identifying the kinds of guns and where the class would take place and who the professors were. Now, so happened that, as Julia will, we were together in a meeting last week, and we had a professor from that university, and I interviewed her subsequently. And yes, I mean, she's changing the class sheet on her front door from feminist theory, to law. This is the kind of fear. This is the kind of fear. And this is in a city, in a country where gunning down is not that common, but we have had our experiences, as you know, of the shooting of female students, particularly in our universities, something that we attest to every year. So I have to also sadly say that it wasn't until September the 10th that university officials actually got around to informing students and faculty that, quote unquote, threats were not considered credible but to be alert. Well, we don't know quite what that means. I will stop here because I really do want to get the voices of our panelists or our discussants onto the floor. I have shared some questions with them. We will start off with a quick question. That's a nice picture. I did want to end this on a high note, so it's kind of nice to have. But I agree with the Baroness that it's time to be bold and it's time to be audacious. It's also time to be humble and time to be inclusive. And I do worry, actually. I think that as women, we haven't necessarily helped ourselves. We haven't helped the cause. And this has been, an ongoing struggle. So I'm very much hoping that the questions I pose to our discussants and the discussion that we will broaden will help us to look to a violence-free future. So my discussants are 5. I have Anita Sarkeesian, Zoe Quinn, Madeline Dinomo, Daphne Sabanes, and Roberta Coco. Or I should say Daphne Plow, right, Daphne? And I have a question for each of you. Why don't I start with Daphne? Daphne, from the perspective of gender relations in the Global South, what do you see as some of the priority areas for action?
Also to be able to access to justice when they come to this sort of online problems. Am I? Is it? Hola? Yes. And one of the things we are working with is in this project on violence against women and ICTs, and we had a research going on for 4 years now, and also projects in different countries with local groups working on this and looking at women's rights specifically. And I like this idea of going for rights and not for protection, no? Because we believe in women's self-determination and their autonomy to decision making. So we feel it's also in women's hands to be able to go forward. But one of the things we really see is that, for instance, in our studies, 49% of the women who have this sort of problem, online attacks and so on, they go to the police and they go to the law enforcement places, but they very seldom find an answer. Sometimes police just discard you and they say, okay, this is not in our law, this kind of attacks, so we can't do anything about it. And then other times they just, they file your denounce and nothing happens. So we have started to study also the kind of laws that are being created. But more than laws, we think that we need protocols for the police and protocols for the prosecutors and protocols for those who take the denounces, because there's a real need to be able to listen to women's voices and to listen what they have to say when they come up with this sort of problems. Now we've had, as you know, in our study, we had 3 groups of women who are mainly attacked. That's, of course, those who have a situation of domestic violence, intimate partner violence, we call it. Those who have an open public opinion, like journalists and women politicians and women rights defenders. At this point, we are having a huge problem with women rights defenders, especially in some of the poorest countries in Latin America, in Central America. They're really under target, And then also we have all this viral stuff going on, no? And what do women do when they're victims of that, no? And we've talked to journalists who tell us, I open my computer every morning to see all the trolling. And some of them had over 100 people trolling them. And one of them was sort of like in a joke, I have a guy trolling me for 10 years now, no? So he's like an old friend. Eh? So but what do we do about it? Eh? What do we do about it? How do we stop this? So I think we need, on one side, this access to justice, but on the other side, a lot of education to be done, and a lot of work to be done with young, very young kids, no? Like our colleague was talking about her children, but then, you know, very young kids, what do we do about them? These kids looking at pornography, at very sexual violent scenes, you know, in front of them. What do we do about that? So we need a lot to do on education too. Women's program in Latin America and the Caribbean, and I'm also working for the Take Back the Tech campaign every year. So we're very happy that we got an award last year by ITU. So, and we do work on this issue. We've been working on this for more than 10 years now. And you won the Tech Award? Yes, we won it. So.
For those of, or it's apc.org probably, right. Sarah, do we have Commissioner Clyburn on the line now? Okay.
Yes, we do. Good morning.
Good morning, Commissioner. Thank you very much for joining us today.
It is my pleasure, and I apologize for not being able to join you in person.
We have your photograph up here. Unfortunately, you cannot see the room. And we've had a good discussion so far. I would like to ask you a question, if I may.
Yes, of course.
What role, Commissioner, do you think communications regulators play in addressing cyber violence against women and girls?
Well, one of the things that we are adamant about is working with other agencies to ensure that the laws of the land are respected. And so when we talk about, you know, the importance of being connected and the empowerment and all of the positive things that happen in this space, we are, you know, we are focused on ensuring that the expectations are realized and that the laws of the land are upheld. During the last presenter's comment, I was struck by the challenges that we have domestically. Too often the laws on the books and the policies and the regulations are not in sync for the digital age. And so it is incumbent upon us to make sure that we make those adjustments. And it is also important that regulators work with companies to ensure that where there is either ambiguity or that the laws are not currently in place, that companies are held accountable, that we are, you know, vigilant, and that we make sure that everyone is in cyberspace and everyone online has the means and ability to benefit and not be discouraged or further at risk. And this is important. We have more than one tool in our arsenal, so to speak, to realize that.
Yes, that's true. We do have more than one tool. Thank you. From a regulator's perspective, what are some of the possible approaches to address the issue that you've seen work, perhaps here in the United States?
What are some of the approaches? I think, and I know that there have been rules and conduct from companies that they have been working with the security forces, with you know, with our police and our security authorities to make sure that not only is bad behavior, you know, exposed, but that authorities at all levels, state and local and federal levels, that they are in sync and have the information they need to prosecute those who are not respectful of the rights of people and are violating policy. Again, we are working closely with all authorities at all levels to make sure that that the experience individuals have are realized, and we want to, from the outset of the stage of development, as was mentioned earlier, that companies set those protocols and those directives in place so that all users know what the rules of the digital road are. And I think that is important from the outset to make sure that everyone realizes what their obligations are as soon as they sign on, as soon as they sign up. That is important to set those digital baselines for behavior.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Commissioner. Is there anything else you would like to just share with the room?
On an upbeat sort of rallying call?
Well, this is one thing that I will say as an individual.
Yeah.
The broadband, the internet is the greatest equalizer of our time. But if we fail to address what we're speaking about today, all of the vulnerabilities, particularly the threat of violence and harassment against women and girls online, then the divides in which are existing, the divides in which we want to eliminate, they will continue, they will grow, and populations and individuals around the world will not realize the benefit. A girl or a woman should not be afraid to be online, to be digitally literate, to be included with the economic and educational and healthcare uplift that the internet, that broadband will bring. She needs to know that her government is in her corner. She needs to know that companies are going to discontinue a relationship with someone if they violate the terms of service. She needs to know that all along the digital chain, that there is protection for her and that there are enforcement protocols and mechanisms in place to ensure her safety. That is the obligation of every single one of us, and we need to hold each other accountable.
I think you'll see quite a few nodding heads over here, Commissioner Clyburn. Shall we
Well, I
applaud
don't see them, but I feel them.
Okay, good.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Commissioner, for joining us. You're free to keep listening in, but we will let you go, knowing how busy you are.
I appreciate it. Be well.
Thank you. So I suggest let's take this down now to a personal level. We've had this kind of umbrella look at the Global South, and that's, sorry, Daphne, to give you that responsibility to speak on behalf of two-thirds of the world. But let's come down to a very individual level. Let's talk to Anita and Zoe. Zoe, perhaps, you first, in your personal and work environment, what have you witnessed as being most effective in addressing this kind of violence against women?
As somebody who works in tech and somebody who runs Crash Override Network, it's, I think, the only direct victims assistance and crisis center for people who are currently under online abuse, as well as a victims advocate group. We've handled I think over 1,000 cases since we launched in January, and we're staffed entirely by people who have been through this. We deal a lot with triage, so people come to us when things have already gotten to the worst. And I can tell you right now that one of the most effective things we see is an active and humane response on tech partners' side. That is one of the most effective things, and it's also often sorely lacking. This requires proper moderation, which takes into account things like intersectional feminism. So terms of service taking into effect things like the fact that trans women often face a very specific type of violence called dead naming, where people post pre-transition names in an effort to intimidate, harass, and endanger their lives. Things like they need to be trained in things like the way domestic violence can manifest online, because the viral nature of the internet can take all of the goodness about things like marketing, things like grassroots activism, and apply it to domestic abuse just as easily as you saw in my case. Or maybe you didn't, but yeah. Well-trained responders, and that's not just in tech companies, but as well as law enforcement. That don't end up re-victimizing the person dealing with this, as is so common in domestic abuse and other sorts of abuse, which is also, again, not often found.
and supportive social networks that don't downplay what's happening, that don't tell them to just get offline and hide, which we've seen in cases like Kathy Sierra's, doesn't actually even work. This is both friends, this is family, especially people who are supervising children, trying to take away their internet access can take away their only support networks and is actually quite damaging. Employers, because a crucial part of online abuse is often the target will be inundated with requests to be fired from their employer. Mental health professionals, because oftentimes these sort of things will not be taken seriously. One of my own agents, I had to call his healthcare provider because they thought he was schizophrenic, that people like me didn't exist, and that a bunch of anonymous people doing this to somebody wasn't possible. In terms of prevention, education about even just digital self-defense, since we are so far behind on this issue, can keep people safe, whether that's training people on what doxing is, which is when people find your home address and post it online, encouraging further action against you or to intimidate and harass you. Things like swatting, where people call in false police reports to your local department, hoping that there will be people erroneously dispatched to your location to harass you further. Just basic things like digital security. A lot of people probably, maybe even in this room, probably still use the same password for everything, and in 2015 we have no excuse to keep doing that. We also need to see, again, these effective terms of service that take all of the different ways that different people from different layers of marginalization or geographical location experience online harassment. We need people that are actually belonging to these demographics working in these departments, so it's not just an echo chamber of a bunch of people that are already in tech deciding what happens to the rest of us. Proper legislation that talks to people like me and people that live and work online, that doesn't destroy vital things like anonymity, which may seem like a big, bad, scary thing, since a lot of people do use it for harmful purposes, but it's also the thing that protects activists like me. It's the thing that protects people that have mental illness from the stigma that speaking out about it comes with, so that they can find community. It's a thing that helps people that are discovering their own gender identities and their own sexualities talk with other people without fear of reprisal, and often violent reprisal. So making sure that people who live and work online and understand these nuances are involved with every step of this is crucial. Otherwise, we'll see more embarrassing statements about series of tubes in governmental bodies. We need people to actually enforce their own terms of service and shut down bad actors, bad faith websites. There are numerous places that host non-consensual pornography and make a profit off of this. There are individuals on services like YouTube that have made a living off of abusing people like Anita and I, who monetize this, who see the mobs, who aren't anonymous, who raise their funds this way to continue attacking, stalking, and harassing us, because it's a cottage industry at this point. And all of these things need to be taken into account and might be difficult to understand from the outside. So if there's one takeaway from all that I can push for, is please involve people who are in tech doing this work already in every step of the way. It requires all of our, so many different prongs. The three-pronged approach is absolutely correct. And it just involving tech literacy at every level is super important to make sure we don't move in a wrong direction and with the best intentions at heart.
So Zoe, you established a sort of peer-to-peer counseling group, and the word that came out at me was humane. You would assume most peer-to-peer counseling group would have this, right? But clearly that's not the case. Now, you say you've had 1,000 people since January, yes? Tell me a little bit about your catchment area and this, who makes up these people that are coming to you?
Putting out guides if we find ourselves having the same conversation. So when I say about 1,000, that's just one-to-one actual casework. So often it's women. It's almost universally marginalized people. We get a lot of Black Lives Matter activists get harassed pretty egregiously, and you can tell that with every layer of disenfranchisement comes with more difficulty, and also different difficulty. So it's a number of people. I can tell you that most of the cases that we've seen where a straight, white, cisgendered, able-bodied man living in the U.S. will be over far shorter than a trans woman of color even living in the same country. And that often the attacks are far less deadly as well, because a lot of this involves trying to push people to suicide. I mean, that's what they did in my own case. I sat for 2 weeks in a chat room silently recording them plotting how they would do that, because nobody else seemed to understand that this is the way this works, and it took often the onus of proving this and explaining it falls on the victims, and that's something that really needs to change going forward. So when I say humane, it's stuff like that. We shouldn't have to keep fighting to, when anybody could just go look at my Twitter mentions right now, where people are impersonating my friends to tell me that I'm, like, to basically use gendered violence slurs against me. That's my day-to-day. And it shouldn't be on people like me to have to prove this.
Anita, with your work through Feminist Frequency, how do you interpret a multi-level approach to working on these issues?
Yeah, so Feminist Frequency is a nonprofit that I run where we look at the way women are represented in the media. And by doing this work, I have been the target for 3 years nonstop of egregious online harassment in all levels. I think it's important to recognize that harassment is, as someone had mentioned, it's not just what is legal and illegal, right? Harassment is threats of violence, but it's also the day-to-day grind of you're a liar, you suck, you know, making all of these hate videos to attack us on a regular basis, and the mobs that come from those hate videos, etc. And so, you know, I've spent a lot of time thinking about online harassment and what we can do about it. And I think something that's really important to understand is that, you know, we know this, but I think it's worth saying that sexism and misogyny did not start with the internet, right? It's been around for a long time, and feminists for decades have been challenging these male-dominated systems. So what we're seeing is that the internet is providing new ways to commit the same types of violence, right? And so understanding that this is a cultural, that we really need to see a big cultural shift in how we deal with this, and we can take note from activists that have been doing this work previously or have continued to do this work while acknowledging how technology is changing the face of current day sexism and misogyny. So creating a cultural shift, I think, takes a great number of approaches, and we've been hearing a lot about systemic change, and that makes me really happy because I think that that's really how we have to do this. And so one of those approaches is, I think that the online social media sites and the places in which we are engaging on these large platforms really need to step up and change the way that their systems operate. So it's not enough that they simply put Band-Aids on the problem areas, that they need to completely reimagine what their systems look like in order to build sites that actively deter online harassment, that make it harder to do this. We're not going to go and convince every single person who does horrible things online to stop doing those things, but we can make systems that actively deter that kind of behavior, which would make a huge impact on the lives of me and so many other people who are being harassed online. So what we have right now is women are forced to build a fortress around themselves with the measly tools that we have online. And so we are being punished for people harassing us and, you know, yes, period. And I think that that's a really big problem. And so we need to really think about how we create this larger cultural shift, taking into consideration society at large, taking into consideration tech platforms, taking into consideration laws, so that people, like all people, can engage online and fully participate without fear of intimidation and violence.
I'll come back to you later, but let me just take from what you're saying and go to Madeline. Madeline, as Anita said, it's systemic. We have to be working on the cultural side of things, and so much of our culture now is informed by infotainment. How do we work, or you've been working, in the entertainment business looking at changing culture? Maybe you could speak to that.
So our work has focused on messaging that our youngest children are seeing, mostly in mass media, TV and film, because what we have learned is that children under the age of 8 are really consuming upwards of 2 hours a day of programming through a television set and not so much on the internet. So our focus is really on younger children. And given that our youngest children are the most impressionable, they are consuming 7 to 10 hours a day of media, more than church, more than school, more than sleeping, and they don't have filters. Yet, many of these children have technical skills that far exceed their critical thinking. So it's alarming when I see that 2-year-olds are engaging for 15 minutes a day on a smartphone, because technically they know what they're doing, but they don't understand emotionally what they're doing. So our work has been very focused on research that analyzes how women and girls are portrayed in the media that we're showing our youngest children, and then we use that as a tool, and we work behind the scenes. So we're more of a B2B than a B2C, and that we focus on working directly with major content creators to change, the message. So our work, I would say, falls more directly under the sensitization. And then we've also used our research to engage youth. So a few of the programs that we've piloted is focused on educating the next generation of filmmakers. And we've done a program called Guess Who, which was supported by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, where we said, take our research, make it less wonky, and how would you create a learning series for children 6 to 9 to teach them how to challenge gender stereotypes? And we did a series of video and curriculum around that. And so it was college students promoting and helping young children as well. Now, some of our partners in more closer to the area that we're talking about today, so there's an organization that we partner with called Ending Domestic Violence, which is based out of the UK, headed by Deborah Jameson. And they have a very powerful youth council. And this youth council goes on university campuses, and they do a lot of workshops, and they try to engage youth in a safe environment. They also have online training for doctors and nurses, because a lot of us don't realize, a lot of our doctors and nurses don't know how to, recognize these symptoms, because it's different than coming in with a broken arm or some type of physical issue. So that's how we interpret, and that's some of the work that we're doing.
Thank you very much for that.
I'm very aware of the time, and I want to move on so that we can take some questions from the floor. So, Roberta, maybe you can tell us a little bit more from your perspective in the industry at Microsoft, and what building alliances across diverse groups might mean in terms of moving this agenda forward. And, I know you also have a perspective on the multi-level approach to cyberVOG.
Yes, sure. Let me begin mentioning a quick sentence that our CEO, Satya Nadella, made recently, announcing our commitment on education. He said, if we are going to solve tomorrow's global challenges, we must come together today to inspire young people everywhere with the promise of technology, and we can't leave anyone out. I think that this is, a quick summary of how we interpret this commitment. Microsoft is a private company, is a global company, but is very interested in making a real effort on education, and especially on youth and how transfer digital skills to youth to help them in their future. And we are also interested in making an even bigger effort on girls. We are not experts in all the things that you have expressed so well, especially the UN entities, but we are quite good at technology. So our commitment is to offer our value to the debate. And we have a huge idea of the partnership between private and public organization. If I'm here, and I am a kind of testimonial for that, because thanks to the great support we got from UN Women, from ITU, from UNESCO, we succeeded in making a very small project who began in Italy a few years ago, Pink Cloud, with the scope to take digital skills to girls. Now this project, thanks to this partnership, became bigger and bigger. This year, in May, we took to Milan 1,900 girls to get 3 days of digital trainings, cloud computing, Internet of Things, self-branding, digital marketing, how to face cyberbullying. Because it's very true that our children, and I still have 3 children, our children are expert in technology, but they are very naive. They don't understand. They don't think of privacy or security as we think. And that's the reason why we are grown up, unfortunately. And so we have the duty to teach them not only the technological component, but also how to help them to prevent from any kind of violence and, bad experiences. Because technology and the capacity to go onto the internet is so valuable for their future, but we have to inform them at the right, And when Doreen was speaking about, you can imagine my house. I'm full of, digital pieces, but I am shocked when I understand that only few percentage of parents know that in every device you have a fantastic feature which is called parental control. In any device, any brand, any software, it's so simple to switch on, and you can monitor what your children are doing. And so these kind of things should become normal for everyone. One last thing, our commitment on education is called Youth Spark. This is a big project that we are taking all over the world. And specifically, for the next 3 years, we would like to find all the partnership possible to put computer science into school from the very beginning, because our kids, our children, see technology as a kind of entertainment, and so they play with it. They are fantastic at using it. I work for Microsoft for more than 20 years, but my little one sometimes comes to me and say, you know that you can do this and this and this, and I'm shocked. And he's and he's 9 years old, and he's much better than I, because for him it's easy. I'm nearly 50. I had to learn how to use technology. So it's very important that we make this partnership even stronger to put computer science in all the schools from the very, very beginning. And that's all.
Thank you, Roberta. I just want to ask Daphne to comment on something. Daphne, if you may. Zoe said something that resonated with me. She said, the violence, it's the catchment area of the violence. It's not just women. We talk about misogyny, it's not just women, but actually it's, quote unquote, every layer of disenfranchised population, right? From a developing country standpoint, would you say that this is what we're seeing, every layer of disenfranchised, not just women?
Yes, in a way, we can say that. It's not only women. We find a lot of problems with cyberbullying also among students. And we had problems also with the LGBT community. And even in my country, 2 girls committed suicide because of that. So because of the abuse and the harassment and everything. So I think we have to take clear steps about that. And that's why I was, in our project, we really think of access to justice and see how we go with it, no? But we also, in APC, in the Women's Program, we worked for the feminist principles of the Internet. because we think that women, you know, we believe in self-determination, and we believe in women's autonomy and our autonomy also for decision making, no? So we believe that in these feminist principles, many of the issues we talked about today are present there, no, like anonymity, no, and I find that, for instance, there's one country that's banning encryption, and it's even sending to jail people who teach encryption. But we know that encryption is very much needed, especially when you're working on human rights issues in countries where things are really bad, no? So, you know, how do we balance that? Yeah? And we also, in the feminist principles, we talk a lot about women's freedom of expression and how we really sustain this, no? And not getting all these attacks because we're saying what we think, or we are activists on issues that might not be nice for some people, no? Like, for instance, abortion issues, reproductive rights issues, sexual rights issues, like. So I think there's a lot to do, and there's a lot to think about as women's organizations, as women activists.
I'm going to open the floor to some questions. I have a gentleman over here. Perhaps you can get a microphone. Please tell us your name.
I am Professor Omemo for Rwanda. I'm the current director of the World Academy of Sciences. The issue of violence for women, cyber violence, is not just a women issue, because I've realized around the table, most of the people who spoke and who were women. It's an issue of our children, our sisters and daughters. So it's our issue. So it's very important to make sure that in the diversity, in doing with the issue, men and women are involved as much as possible to give their opinion. Also, the issue of the left behind of the internet. Here we spoke, for example, some of us, we spoke here, we have children, and we can see the devices, we may even understand how to protect our children. For example, the issue of parental control. But there are many parents throughout the world who are illiterate. And as we move to more access, we will have billions of devices that are going to be in the third world, in the developing countries, where the moms and dads are just not only illiterate in terms of ICT, they're just illiterate. Basta, as I say in Italian. They're just illiterate. So how do you help? Is it the problem of these parents? So that what was said, that it is also the responsibility of the corporate companies that have access to the technology. The internet giants have the responsibility to put the right protections. In terms of the governance, the internet governance, you saw the graphic they put there. We have the internet governance in general. In Europe and mostly OECD countries, you have a data protection legislation. But in the developing world, the regulations or regulators don't have that. They have laws on the telecom laws, but they don't have data protection law. Like, for example, the one we have, that you have, for example, in Europe. That's very important. And that also has an impact on the issue of privacy. Privacy is a must. The internet giant makes money on privacy because you accept to give your data. You give your data. You say who you are, you go on Facebook, you go on Twitter, you go on the Gmail account, you have all your privacies there. They make money on it. So it is very important to make sure that the issue of privacy is understood, but also is understood not only the way we may be understanding those who live in the developed world or living in Europe and in OECD countries, but in the developing world. What is privacy? How does privacy link with our local culture? These are very important issues that we have to do as for debate. And I'm going to finish with one of the things that the Baroness said, and the right to own your own data, the right to be able to delete. A young girl now going to the internet, she's going to give everything. But you don't want that everything to get her when she wants to get a job, like your job, because you're going to come back and say, oh, she put all this data. So you need to be able to, the right to delete, the right to own your own data. But you can even put in the legislation, it's your own copyright. Copyright does not mean, it's not a patent. I wrote something here, as soon as I put it on the paper here, I own it. But once you give it, you put it in Gmail account, they own it. Hey, they shouldn't be owning it, because it is mine. So I should be able to say, I would like to get it back. So these are the things that messages I wanted just to bring to this table. The issue of privacy, I think, is very, very central. We should be able to see how legislation can help that. I thank you.
Thank you for that.
From Rwanda, that's a very important perspective, for sure. Any questions from the floor? Hold a second. I want to make sure I get people from behind. One lady, 2, 3, 4. No. Yes.
My name is Cheryl Miller. I'm the Executive Director of the Digital Leadership Institute in Brussels. And first, I'm really happy to announce that we are actually launching a campaign called Move It Forward that's about teaching girls and women themselves to address cyber violence. So teaching them skills and kind of a startup approach to tackle challenges that are facing them in their communities. And in doing this, I got my first own cyber violence treatment this weekend. So I feel now that I'm initiated. And actually, I would like to talk about that question of the fear factor and how we shouldn't be rebranding who we are to cower to these threats that, of course, are very real. But I would like to ask the people who've had more intimate experience with this, and it turns out more and more of us do, the more you scratch the surface, the more you find out about these horrible stories. How do you keep the bravery? How do you keep plugging forward and really taking the bull by the horns and just doing what needs to be done?
Right there. Okay.
Thank you very much, everybody, for your excellent presentation. I'm Samia Malham from the World Bank in Washington, D.C. We're launching in January the World Development Report about the Internet and impact on development. And what we're finding, which is probably no surprise to any one of you, is that the Internet, where the analog foundation is bad, will really amplify this foundation. When it's good, and I'm sorry to be so good and bad type, whenever the foundation is good, it will also amplify it. So I want to go back to the sensitization part. So much has to be changed in the culture. So much has to be changed in education, the parents, as the minister from Rwanda said. What are we doing to partner with private sector? These young kids in Tanzania recharging their card and watching bad picture, whose parents are probably illiterate and can never get, the fact that this is not the right thing to do. How can we use the mobile operators? How can we use the schools? When Microsoft equips schools with labs and when World Bank finances education project, how can we ensure we create this positive brainwashing, if you will, ecosystem to prevent future perpetrator, to equip future victims? And I know we keep talking about young girls and girls, but we have to also be cognizant that a lot of the young girls bully themselves, other young girls. So how do we create this ecosystem where we prevent harm from happening way before it does? Thank you.
Madam.
I'm Dr. Verma from India, and I was a former director who was studied there. And I agree with the learned speaker that we had created just to give the mental peace to the girls, especially that if they are facing any kind of cyberbullying, we would make a small cell and we'll call them that how you are feeling and what you are doing. And many times they don't share with the parents, but they share with the teachers. So I am very proud in telling that in the duration of 5 years, I could talk to 50 girls who were the target of cyberbullying. And we would just give them moral support and awareness and tell them how to do it. Thank you.
My name is Milena Grillo. I come from Costa Rica. I'm the executive director of Palomar Foundation, also a member of ITU Child Online Protection, and represent the Latin American region at the International Council of NGO on Violence Against Children. And what I like to just leave to the consideration of the group is going forward from this report. How can we bring information and voice to the states in the region for more action? The Latin American region is one of the highest in terms of penetration growth of ITU. At the time, 9 countries of the region are promoting access to ITU as one of the main components of poverty overcoming and social exclusion policies. And none of these strategies of bringing access to the more vulnerable populations are accompanied by a strategy of education in terms of safe and responsible and productive use. So we are giving access, which we all want, but we are not really taking due care of the risky challenge of the part. Private companies are very cooperative. We have in Costa Rica worked with Microsoft, Intel, all providers. But the governments in the region, we have the perception that they still perceive this as like a sophisticated level of discussion, and since we have organized crime, drug trafficking, sexual exploitation, trafficking of persons, and all kind of this more, demanding violence issues, the issue we're talking this is left behind. While organized crime, trafficking, commercial sexual exploitation, pornography are using ITC to hurt our children and our women. So we really need the World Bank, ITU, and people who talk to governments, to really take perhaps this report and other informations and bring this issue to discussion for political agenda to be more blunt on it. Thank you.
Comment before I wrap this up, because we will not have time to answer the questions, but I think the questions stand on their own very well in the sense that they guide what we know we need to be doing.
Thank you, Nidhi. So I just want to end on a very high note, because you like high notes. I know for a fact that technology companies are aware of this, and they are doing some things, and one that I want to share with you is the following. So AVG Technologies, it's a security company, and what they're working on is a very simple thing. They have this, most of you may know about do not track. So you can put that on your browser, and then people won't track you. But they actually have a little symbol coming up, and you could put it on you wherever you are, and it says, do not take my photo. And what it means is, if somebody posts something on the web, say on Facebook, but I'm wearing that do not take my photo, Facebook will not allow it to be published. And if one big company like Facebook says, if you're wearing that and suddenly a photo has appeared, because they can do recognition, right? If they recognize that symbol, they won't have it. And so at least they're aware of it, they're working on it, and it's at least one initiative that may address some of the issues talked about today.
In fact, the report also does try to bring in some other high notes from industry, from government, from legislators, from regulators, and from people like yourselves, Zoe and Anita, for the work that you're doing and the way we're trying to address the issue. I will hand over the microphone now to my closers, but before I do that, I want to ask you please to applaud our panelists who are not sitting on a panel.
Thank you very much, Needy, for your excellent moderation, and many thanks to all of the panelists. I was asked to try to summarize. Can you hear me? Does someone else have their microphone on? Can you hear me? No. Can you hear me? No. Now you can hear me? I'll just come over here. Okay, so thank you again, Needy. So I was asked to try to summarize some of the discussion, which I think would be a great challenge. But what struck me, I think, from all of the interventions, I mean, clearly everyone in this room understands the critical and urgent need to address this issue. But what struck me is I think that all of the ingredients, or like the recipe to fix this, it's sort of here in the room. From we have the World Bank, we have USAID, we have governments, we have NGOs, we have the technologists on all sides, we have Hollywood, we have the UN. So I think we have what it takes to do something. And I really think that we have issued a wake-up call today, as Needy intended. And I think now it's our responsibility, each and every one of us, to move forward and try through constructive partnerships to really try to fix this issue in any way that we can, and I believe that we can do that through partnerships. We will be meeting on Saturday to relaunch the Broadband Commission, which will now be the Broadband Commission for Sustainable Development. It was Digital Development before, and so this is the last meeting of this working group under the previous commission. So I'd like to thank everybody for having been involved in this working group. I think, as we saw today, this group has really achieved a lot, but of course there's a lot more work to be done. And now I think I'll just stop there and hand back over, maybe Golsa, if you'd like to say a few words on behalf of UNESCO.
Well, thank you very much. Again, my apologies from Ms. Bokova. She sent me another message. She's feeling really very, very bad about not being able to come here today. But as you can imagine, coming from the other end of the town when traffic is impossible was not a very practical idea anyway. I think one of the important things, the question I keep asking myself is that, you know, we talk about these things, but when I look around the room, around the table, I see more of us, meaning women, talking about it. And the challenge is always how to carry this conversation to a broader, more general, more public platform. And for that, I think what I will do on my side is to ask Ms. Bokova, the Director General of UNESCO, to really put this on the agenda when she opens the Broadband Commission meeting on Saturday as one of the co-chairs of the Broadband Commission, where we have very, very, very powerful people. As I mentioned in the beginning, we have the President of Rwanda, the richest man in the world, or the second richest man, depending on what happens in the global economy. But we also have Microsoft, we have Intel, we have Alcatel-Lucent, which is now also Nokia. We have Facebook. I think last year Facebook was there. So we do have a lot of the stakeholders, a lot of the involved groups around the table at the Broadband Commission, and the Broadband Commission should really be made very much aware of this report and of what is happening out there. I remember about a year ago I was asked to give a talk in Paris, a TED talk, on the power of ICTs for gender equality and empowerment. And I talked about some of these problems in a second-hand way. I couldn't believe the reaction of the audience, which was a mixed audience, but they were really not interested in hearing what I had to say about the cyberbullying, cyber violence, and they were thinking that maybe this woman is making a big deal out of nothing, which was very interesting to watch, and then to have some discussions with some of the audience after the talk. But I think we need to make more noise and make it more widely known and addressed, because just us addressing it will not really lead to lasting solutions. So I will take the message to Ms. Bokova and her apologies again. Thank you.
Thank you. Goes to Magdi on behalf of UNDP.
Thank you very much, Doreen. I think the discussion this morning allowed to delve, at least my impression was that we bring to the fore the cyber dimension of gender-based violence in a very clear manner. And yes, it wasn't invented by the net. Ms. Oy mentioned that, but it is a new theater of operations for gender-based violence, and therefore it's a place where attack and defense needs to happen, and where response need to be engineered. I was personally afraid and ashamed, and redoubled in my resolve to work with my colleagues on responses as I was hearing the testimonials and the ideas that came up. I also thought that it was encouraging to hear how much thinking and how much action, especially social action, grassroots action, individual action, is going on actually to understand the phenomenon, to respond to it, to raise awareness, to generate noise, and intelligent noise, as our colleague from UNESCO just said. My third point is that we need to tackle the online-offline continuum. I think it's important to address in the real space the root causes of harmful conduct in the virtual space. And technology will help us, but will help us to a certain extent. I don't think it's a technology issue. I think it's a governance issue. I think it's a political issue. We've been gathering in New York to celebrate the 70th anniversary of the UN and a new development agenda that claims it is or will be universal. I was reading Ms. Clinton today say that it's not enough to condemn campus sexual assault, we need to end it. To me, there's a very clear connection between technology and campus, and we probably need to delve a little bit more, and that is not something that happens only in the US. That is not an issue of rich countries. Campus is technological in rich and not so rich countries, and I think we need to look into that. I was very interested in Baroness Kidron's point on understanding not how to use technology is not as much as understanding the technology you're using. Which has to do with the naive skills that children have, or that more technologically accustomed people have, as compared to, say, an illiterate mother. But let me give an optimistic and Rousseauian human perspective of that. I still believe that an illiterate, non-IT skilled mother knows more about her child and about how he or she reacts to technology and uses it, even if she doesn't understand the technology. And so, yes, oversight features and parental controls will be important, but I think nothing replaces the capacity to understand what is going on in the younger minds, and that's a call for great power of humanity, I think, beyond technology. Sorry for those who help us with technology to be a better humanity. And finally, I liked very much the point again from Baroness Beeban about the power of principle. Isn't that really the only power of us here in the UN? I mean, at the end, the power of the people who give us the strength to fight for what we believe in, or as Madam Clark, I believe, said, stopping gender-based violence on the streets and on the IT highway. That's what we believe in. And we won't succeed without the power of principle, but I think we will succeed precisely because of the power of principle. Madam, over to you.
Thank you so much for those eloquent words. To the many people who spoke here today, thank you so much for the information, the insights that have been shared, and I hope that just spurs us on to do even more. And thank you so much for providing a report that has given us this kind of conversation. I also just want to share my own experience of similar to yours, where I was told by an industry representative when I was raising my concern about the violence and the need for them to take responsibility to address this, and he just looked at me and said, "You're so uptight, lady." You know, this is an industry. This is our business model. You're asking us to cut down profit. And for him it was like, you know, you're mad, you know. So he just said, "You're so uptight." I tried to chill a little bit and be firm at the same time to say, I'm not uptight, I just know my story. But so I can really identify with your experience. And I think now there's enough evidence for them to know that it's not the same reaction that we used to get in the 70s and the 80s as the feminists, where people thought that, my goodness, we don't have a sense of humor. It's that kind of looking at the issue. I just, on behalf of UN Women, I would like to assure everybody that in the work that we're going to be doing and continue to do on violence against women, this is certainly an issue that we will make sure is fully integrated in our work, as well as in our Agenda 2030 work. This is also an issue that we hope to, when we engage with not just the ministers that we work with and civil society, who already don't need to be convinced because they are already on board, but when we engage with our private sector partners and when we engage with heads of state, because you also need them to have a full grasp of how much is happening in their own countries. On the 27th of September, on Sunday, we're going to be convening the first ever sort of a meeting of heads of states, where they will be from 9 to 4 discussing their individual commitment and action that they will take in their own countries to address the gaps identified in the Beijing review in relation to women and girls. And so we will have time to speak at the beginning and at the end, and I will make sure that we cover this issue between me and the SG, that we'll shoulder each other to make sure that the issue, and of course we do have civil society also speaking at that meeting, and we are going to have a bit of a caucus, and we will make sure that we spread ourselves so that the message is not lost. I think it's important to make the point that technology is an enabler and an equalizer, but it can also be a divider. It can also make those who have access to gadgets and devices to move much further and astray, and those who have very little to be left behind, and for the divide to get even wider. I look at my country, South Africa, a child who goes to school in Sandton in the heart of Johannesburg, with a school that tells them it is compulsory for them to have an iPad. And a child who goes to school in rural areas who might not have seen an iPad. And what chance does that child in the rural area have to catch up with this child who's already so privileged? So these are some of the things, but also this child who has access to these gadgets has to be guided so that this gadget does not become detrimental to them. So we look forward to working with you. People laugh at me and roll their eyes, but sometimes we have to say these crazy things when we are sort of in a leadership position, that we must look at 2030 as an expiry date for gender inequality and do everything in our power to get there in that way. Thank you.